Hello friends, welcome to the M.A.R.E podcast. Before we get started, you can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and YouTube. Don't forget that you can find more about the M.A.R.E project at www.marehamburg.com, and you can support the project and this podcast through Patreon. All the links are in the description. Enjoy!
Friends and colleagues, welcome to another episode of the M.A.R.E podcast. Today we have a special episode for you in the sense that this is different than what we have been doing so far. Today I have two guests with me who I will introduce right away. And also today we gathered here to have a discussion about a specific topic rather than just highlighting early career researchers. So first of all, we have Nikos here, Nikos Mackenzie, who you may remember from episode 3, fellow M.A.R.E committee member. Nikos is from New Mexico. He recently graduated from the University of Malta with a master's degree in Maritime Archaeology, and he also has a law degree and has a background in history and politics. And also with us, new to the podcast, is Brooke Boyd. Brooke is born and raised in New Orleans. She holds a Master of Science in Archaeology, Maritime stream, so Maritime Archaeology from the University of Oxford. She also holds a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and a Bachelor of Arts in Latin and Classical Studies from Tulane University. So today I have two brilliant people here who have diverse backgrounds, early career, maritime archaeologists, and we want to talk about a very specific topic. So I'm going to let them take it away and give us an introduction to what we're talking about today. Hey friends, this is George from the future. It was mentioned to me by Nikos that I've made a mistake in the introduction because he doesn't actually have a law degree, as I said, but he has background in law. He works at a law firm and he started a law degree, but didn't actually finish it and change it to something else. So I'm sorry for my mistake. Back to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, George. Really happy to be here. Do you need to tell? I haven't graduated yet. I've defended my thesis, but yeah, no, it's okay. Just important to be honest about the never-ending work. So,
all right. When are you graduating? Sorry, out of context.
February. Well, yeah, it should be February.
Hey, it's coming. It's coming. Anyway,
yeah, it's coming.
Let's get back to it.
Yeah. So yeah, no. I wanted to have a conversation. I think it's timely. I think it's important about the impact that the Trump administration has had in the last 6 months, because he's been in office since January, on archaeology in the United States and abroad, cultural heritage in the United States and abroad, because there has been a huge impact, and I think it's an important thing to talk about. Since Trump took office in January, on January 20th of this year, we've had over 170 executive orders. Now, the United States there's federal offices, and these operate at like a national level, federal organizations that manage huge amounts of what the U.S. government actually does. This is like the Environmental Protection Agency and others, and those are in large part under kind of like mixed-use control between the executive branch and Congress. So Congress is the one who delivers money, often appropriates funds to these organizations, and then the U.S. government, the executive, which is under the president, is the one who can control the organizations and the scope of the organizations. It's a lot more complicated than that. There's a lot more that goes into this, but that is more or less the structure that we're looking at here. So a lot of these organizations have been created by executive order, which is just the president signing a document that comes out that says we're creating this thing that has this much stuff, and it's under the influence of the executive branch. Some of them have been created by Congress. Funding is appropriated kind of by both. So again, there are complex moving things here, but that's the general gist of things. So a lot of these executive orders have been targeted at a bunch of different things. There's a lot of other problems besides just archaeological issues and cultural heritage issues. I don't want to give the impression that cultural heritage is the only thing that matters in this conversation. I think that there's a lot of issues is a light way of putting it, in the United States over the last 6 months that have been kind of horrifying to watch, with ICE deportations and stricter border security and a lot of other things. But in addition to these horrifying items, are a series of executive orders that are particularly bothering to archaeologists. I think the first one I'd like to talk about, and maybe the most galling, is Executive Order 14253, which is called Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, which is a direct kind of attempt at a narrative control over the Smithsonian. But I also want to talk about other things. There's executive orders about eliminating the Institute of Museum and Library Services, massive cuts to the National Science Foundation, massive cuts to the Endowment for the Humanities, massive cuts to NOAA, which does a lot of the governmental side of underwater archaeology, but also massive cuts to the National Park Service, tens of thousands of layoffs, lots of other little cultural heritage issues here, and then potential changes to fundamental underlying statutory issues like the National Heritage Protection Act and the National Environmental Protection Act and the Antiquities Act, which all kind of in their own ways control the way archaeology is done in the United States. So those are the things I'd like to try and touch on today, even though I don't think that we're going to get to have a super deep conversation about each of them for no other reason but that I'm not an expert in most of this stuff, but I do think it's important to talk.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So obviously I am no expert in any of that stuff. So I don't know, take it one by one. Start from the most interesting one, the one you think it's the most important. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, well, I think like the Smithsonian one's kind of easier to talk about because there's not like, at least I'm sure there are, but there aren't these like huge fundamental underlying massive bodies of statutory law that impact it as well. But yeah, so okay, do you know what DEI is, George? Do you know what that term means?
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, I'm
If
just
we're
not
talking
sure.
about the same thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, diversity, equity.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so Trump has and the Republican Party in the United States probably has declared a war on diversity, equity, which whether or not you agree with that, I guess is neither really here nor there. But as part of that, he issued that executive order I mentioned earlier, which again is called Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, which directed the removal, and this is a direct quote, of, quote, improper, divisive, or anti-American ideology from the Smithsonian. So the Smithsonian is a massive institution in the United States. It's, I think, one of the largest museums on the planet. It's 21 separate individual museums. Most of those are in Washington, D.C., but they're scattered across the country. And there's like an additional 14 research centers that the Smithsonian supports. Not all of them are archaeology, but a lot of them are obviously cultural heritage. So yeah, that one's really disturbing. I have a good quote from, yeah, no, please continue. Sorry, go ahead. I don't want to just talk the entire time. I don't think that's very good podcasting. It's not great radio.
No, I'm just like, I have questions now. I don't know. Before I start, I don't know if Brooke wants to add anything to it. If she had any experience when she I don't know, saw those things
with museums, but I want to add museums in the United States. The reason why this legislation exists and why he's targeting this is because it's an attempt to control narratives about power and right of place in the United States regarding, ethnic and racial divides and ethnic and racial history in the United States. It's a desire to create this monolithic and ultimately fascist narrative about U.S. history in the past and how it is like a natural course to what he wants to create as far as the socio-political landscape goes in the United States today.
Yeah. So before I go into questions about this, I just want to I feel the need to say that when this came up as an idea, when Nikos came up with this as an idea, he was like, oh, maybe this is too American centric for the podcast. And I really don't think that I really think that it's not, because, this is
It's
the kind of
it goes
thing.
on all over the world. It's
Exactly.
right now we're in the eye right now, but it goes on, in the South China Sea, goes on in the Mediterranean.
Oh, yes.
It's because also archaeology, and especially archaeology, it's a really easy way for countries to claim they've always, quote unquote, always been there. This is how we interpret this piece of history, and it shows that we were always here. This is what we always were. And so, you're wrong when you say that it's not that's not how we should interpret it,
Oh, yeah.
which is a really dangerous idea.
Well, and
Yeah.
it's even, the internationality of it all too. There's more impacts because we're going to talk about this a little bit later. But the United States decided to leave UNESCO again, right? So that was a decision that came through last month. So yeah, it does have wide-reaching impact, but it is kind of, I think, narrowly tailored to the people who are currently, I mean, here, but the U.S. has outsized impact on the world.
Yeah, yeah. And we see how like in like a more philosophical kind of thing, like how archaeology is really a tool for politics, and how important it is to have, good archaeology in a country, because it can manipulate like the whole narrative. But before I get lost in my thoughts, let's go back to like the executive order on the Smithsonian. They say
Right.
to bring back sanity and truth so in like practical aspects, how does that happen? What are they trying to erase? What's happening?
Well, okay, so the first thing, almost the first day of his new administration, the Smithsonian shut its diversity office in response to that, like banning of DEI. This is before the executive was passed. Um, so there's that. Most of what it appears that they want to do is rewrite some signs, which is, rewriting a lot of the history that's displayed in the Smithsonian. Um, some of what they've explicitly stated they've had problems with was like with the African American History Museum, which had a particular blurb about like the nuclear family being part of like quote unquote white culture or whatever. But that was removed in 2020, so that hasn't even been part of the that museum in years. But one of the other things is it's uh directly attacking parts of uh the historiography that's displayed that represents trans women. The direct quote is something about not portraying men as women. I don't have the exact quote in front of me,
Yeah,
but that's
that's
part
okay.
of the executive order. Um, but yeah, they say that that the Smithsonian has been ideologically captured. Um, yeah, and I do have some quotes here, from some other people who have reacted to it. The
Okay.
current president of the Organization of American Historians said that he was appalled, angry, and frustrated, but not fully surprised. He said that there have been plenty of other executive orders, but this is a full frontal assault. I read it as basically a declaration of war on American historians and curators and on the Smithsonian. Um,
Yeah.
he
I
said that in an
mean,
interview with The Guardian. Yeah. Um, and another history professor from the University of Massachusetts said that this is a five alarm fire for public history, science, and education in America.
wow. So it's first of all, it's I I don't know how it is in other countries, but it sounds crazy to me how, I mean, I imagine this works everywhere the same way. How the government can like control a museum and like a historian and like an academic institution, because I imagine we'll get into that later. The like institutions and what's going on with like the
Um,
colleges and universities in the United States.
yeah, I mean, I don't have specific notes about that,
Mm,
because that's a really broad issue. It is a
yeah, yeah.
serious problem. I think that the large issue is not so much that they can directly control the arms. So,
Yeah, it's a large attempt to. I mean, you can't perform this vital research that you do. You know, we're not going to give you money to clean your parking lot or pay your staff if you don't display this the way that I want. And they do the same thing to the states where they say, you know, we're going to withhold your Department of Education funding if you don't rewrite your textbooks now to match how we've altered the Smithsonian. This is the narrative we're telling you to put in your textbooks, and if you don't put it in there, then, you know, we're gonna withhold X funding or Y funding. In Louisiana, where I'm from, their frequent go-to is to withhold our road funding because we have kind of famously horrible roads.
Wow.
Well, and that
Okay.
we can jump ahead a little bit because this is directly relevant. There's I think billions of dollars cut to the National Science Foundation. But of that, I think the National Science Foundation owes right now, and I could be wrong because a lot of this stuff changes literally hourly, depending on if you're keeping up with the news as chronically as I do. They owe, I think, $75 million in funds just for archaeology and paleoanthropology and like other fields, right? So that's the amount of money that has not been distributed. 20 million or 2 million of that is just from like 16 grants that were canceled between April and June of this year. So those are like critical funds for people doing research in our field. And I know one of them because this was reported in Science magazine. A lot of this I am getting from the previous quotes I got from The Guardian. This is from Science magazine. Sorry, I need to cite my sources. I apologize.
It's okay.
Yeah, so
No,
one
this
of
is
these was a study that was, it was the largest study scrutinizing Mayan DNA, right? They lost their grant in the final days before finishing the project. So they've done all the data collection, but now they can't finish the project. And it's a lot of these were identified by Ted Cruz. He was a senator from Texas. He's a famous kind of arch conservative senator from Texas, also famous for fleeing Texas during the last two floods that they've had. He has not been in the state, or not two floods, during the flood, and then before that, this like massive giant power outage. He was not in the state for either of those disasters. But yeah, he called these like grants woke and DEI, and he also said, I think he singled out this one in particular, but I could be wrong. I could be misreading, as neo-Marxist class warfare propaganda, which I got a political science degree. I'm not entirely sure what he means by neo-Marxist, but I think it would just be Marxist or whatever. Yeah. So there's that. Vanderbilt lost like $150,000 in funding, in grant funding that was supposed to support a PhD student and like a master's student. So yeah, this is like widespread, and that's just from the National Science Foundation. It's not talking about all the other agencies.
Yeah, I want to add a little bit of context to about like the way this funding is dispersed. So obviously these big called R1 universities or tier 1 research universities, they receive these really large grants from the federal government. They may come from like the Institute of Health or, you know, the National Science Foundation. They receive, you know, millions, if not billions in funding. And then they pass that money down to other universities to complete certain parts of the research. So again, at smaller universities who aren't able to compete for these grants on their own, or especially not from outside sources, they're not going to get any funding. A lot of their research and a lot of their programs, their museums are going to have to be cut.
I mean,
and most of this funding, it's important to remember, is appropriated by Congress. So there's constant, literally since almost the moment he's gotten into office, and this happened during his last administration, and to be fair to Trump, has happened to every president, at least since the 70s. As soon as anyone does anything, there's a lawsuit to see if it's like legal to do that thing. And so people have been suing. And I know the American Library Association sued over the executive order that eliminated the Institute of Museum and Library Services, because the money that's supposed to be given to museums and libraries, and a lot of the money that's supposed to be given to universities, is appropriated by Congress. So it's not within the president's authority to stop that funding. Now, this is kind of stopped being a serious point of contention since they passed this, what they called the Big Beautiful Bill, which cut billions of dollars from all sorts of things across American like social service state, particularly Medicare and Medicaid. But that also included cuts to a bunch of like I said, the National Endowment for the Humanities and a lot of these other organizations as well.
No.
So whether or not this refusal to disperse funds is even legal is kind of up for question right now in a lot of places.
Yeah, so that was another thing that I was thinking about, like, is that legal? Is no, like, were they in lawsuits? And as you said, there were. So I want to hear more about, because we talked about this Smithsonian and this like bring back sanity. I'm going to use that phrase for the rest of the episode now.
Yeah, sure.
Sanity
Because it sounds unhinged.
Sounds ridiculous. Anyway,
yeah.
So what's the reason behind all that? Because is it all for like the sanity of American history, like all these funding cuts? What are the other like executive orders that affect here? Because I imagine it's not just one, right?
Yeah, well, there's just the one for the Smithsonian. Well, not just the one, but the one for the Smithsonian. There are a bunch of other executive orders. The day one executive order that I think is also directly relevant, especially to what Brooke does, was pausing. He declared an energy emergency, and as part of that energy emergency, and as part of another executive order, although I don't think I have the number written down, so I apologize for that.
It's okay.
Paused work on a lot of renewable energy.
I can speak a lot to the first one and about, the way that most archaeology in the United States works. So to preface all of this, number one, there's not enough archaeologists in the United States. They're very in demand because we require, by law, like a lot of developed countries around the world, we require archaeological investigations prior to most large infrastructure projects, onshore and offshore. So the way that this executive order worked wasn't like he said, okay, now we no longer require archaeology. He's not allowed to do that because archaeology is required by a congressional act called the National Historic Preservation Act. And there's a whole bunch of other acts like the Submerged Lands Act that tie in different pieces and parts, whereas like what creates a quote unquote federal nexus, which is, when we would get involved. So when does that happen offshore? What kind of project does it happen on? Does it happen on the entire project or just what are called permit areas? And the Clean Water Act is another big one, which says that private companies aren't allowed to like pollute our water and our wetlands. And that's another one he's really torn out a lot. But yeah, the way that he was able to, affect this sort of change is that he removed a lot of regulations. So he said, you don't need to do surveys for, these actions. I don't know the ones off the top of my head, but the bigger one was he left it up to individual offices, so branches of the federal government, so like a specific U.S. Army Corps of Engineers office. He left it up to individual offices to decide what projects meet like the regulatory threshold. So, whereas 2 years ago, Exxon's project may have needed, like $2 billion in archaeological survey. Now it doesn't need it at all. You can run straight through that wetland. You can run straight through that area, which you can look at USGS topos and see there's like historic farmsteads, say there's mounds, or, offshore, we can look at old maps and, historical records and see that there was a shipwreck here, or there's been a lot of land loss in this area. And there may be submerged prehistoric sites, which, that's a whole other area of U.S. archaeology, which is super cool because they get it in rivers too. But yeah, and for more context, I work in commercial archaeology in the United States, or a larger industry called CRM, or Cultural Resource Management. I work onshore and offshore. Yeah, right. I've been camped out on a project in Vicksburg for months, which I can't really talk about, but it will never end.
Wow. Okay. That's it's kind of a lot of information for me being from the outside of the US. But it's also kind of
sorry, you're getting a crash course in American
crash course. Wow. In American politics, in American, like how archaeology in the USA works. But yeah, but no, I'm surprised. But one of the first things that Brooke said, that the USA is in need of more archaeologists, or was in need of more archaeologists, whilst I thought it was the other way around. Is it
Oh,
still the
no,
case?
it's like, uh, to do a broad comparison, after I graduated from Oxford, I looked for a job in England where I learned that the basic salary is around £23,000 and they get furloughed a lot of the year because there's not enough work. Um, Whereas in the United States, I'm employed all year. I make a lot more than £23,000. Just to give some broad figures, which I think I read in like an SAA article a long ways back, there's around 10,000 archaeologists practicing in the United States at any given time. And that includes grad students, academic archaeologists, and like the largest branch, which is me, CRM. And to think about like the scale that you need, every single pipeline, most power lines, and every time a company needs to go in and service their cell tower, they need to send archaeologists out. And so it's like a massive booming industry. But these regulatory cutbacks, they do affect our jobs in a way that they also affect our environment, which I think most archaeologists in the US, a lot of it's performed out of like a deep-seated desire to protect, our cultural heritage. And a lot of that has to do with the environment where it's located. They are integral to each other in the way that we interpret cultural heritage in the United States.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, it's very encouraging to hear that, yeah, everything that happens, you require an archaeologist to go see it first. But on the other hand, like with the situation now, so which brings me to my next point. If there are like 10,000 practicing archaeologists right now in the US, what is the response to what's going on? Like what's happening? Or is it like there's not really much people can do?
There's not much that, honestly, there's not much people can do. I think the SAA issued a letter condemning a lot of this because there was also a Senate ruling which requested the removal of all requirements for underwater archaeological surveys in advance of oil and gas projects offshore, which would be catastrophic because the Gulf of Mexico is one of the most highly trafficked waterways in the world. It has been for centuries. And that would have cause an untold amount of damage to everything down there, which is like, there's also these like beautiful reefs down there throughout the entire the Gulf.
Yeah.
When I know the Advisory Council on Underwater Archaeology also issued a statement. I mean, a lot of these organizations have issued these statements condemning, but because the Republican Party controls the House, like the lower and upper part of the Congress, the House and the Senate, and the judiciary is largely conservative after a bunch of Trump appointments during his last term, and obviously Trump is conservative, and there's like more or less ideological alignment amongst the controlling parts of the national government. There's not much legally that people can do besides argue it in court, which takes forever, obviously, and costs a lot of money.
His energy emergency, I know. But yeah, US politics is mostly guided by public opinion. And so for us to affect
vibes-based politics is what it is.
Vibes-based politics. For us to affect any sort of change as far as protection for cultural heritage in the United States, we would need, as archaeologists, to get the general public to care about our plight. And I just think we as archaeologists are not very great at public outreach or communication. But I really care about these issues. I certainly wrote my senator, my congressman, and my home city, New Orleans, is involved in a lot of archaeology. It is like there's like a million companies out of New Orleans. And that's a big part of also why I wanted to come on your podcast. I think it's important to talk about these issues because that is the only way that they will receive the protections that they need.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. But it's a pleasure to have you. And it's like, on the one hand, it sounds so encouraging, but on the other hand, I'm like, oh my God, but is this really happening? But anyway, let's, I don't know, tell me more. Go on. What else is going on?
Hey, it's George from the future again. Thank you for listening to part 1 of this episode. Make sure you go check the second one as well. Bye!